And then, bam.
This is Dr. Tim Furnish, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Thanks for coming on the show, man. I look. So first of all, for everybody who doesn't know, I've known Tim for a long time now. I mean, it's a long time, and more than 10 years. We have had a lot of exchanges, and not just about Islam. We've talked about the Olympics. We've talked about baseball. We've talked about sports in general, music. I mean, well-rounded stuff. You're an actor. You're a fencer. And overall, an interesting dude. And one of my very few virtual friends who I've hardly ever seen, but I've seen you face to face. We've broke bread and had a good time.
Yep.
Okay, so first off, let me ask you this. This is one of the things I was thinking about the other day. If I was to have told you, politics aside, the next president is going to get Iran in a position where they're going to be forced to give up their nuclear program, come to a negotiating table, probably bring them into modern times in terms of how they see things. A regime change is possible, but for sure, we're going to have a checked up Iran. Also, most of the Arab world who is against Israel will now have to consider another option, and possibly we will see an expansion of the Abraham Accords. Would you take that deal? If you were back in, I don't know, last October?
Sure. Although I have to say, Pete, I think you're a little too rosy on the front end of that.
Oh, for sure. I'm saying possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty good setting of the table there. And even if some of those things come to pass, the world's better off than it was, last year.
Yeah. Is Iran a reliable partner to trade with, to broker with, to make agreements with?
For us, no.
No, for who?
Not for us, because one of the platform planks of the Islamic Republic of Iran is anti-Western in general and anti-U.S. in particular.
Right.
So no, we can't, honestly, without proper monitoring and curb rails, we can't trust them as far as we can throw them. The Ayatollahs, mind you, I'm not talking about the Iranian people, I'm talking about the people running the country, because it is part and parcel of their ideology that they be opposed to us. So, I mean, it's in some ways they almost define themselves by what they're not more than by what they are. And I mean, basically they've tried to take up the mantle. Remember back during the Cold War, the so-called non-aligned movement, which India purported to head up. We're not aligned with the Americans. We're not aligned with the Soviets. So since the end of the Cold War and the coming of the Islamic Republic, they've kind of tried to take that mantle over it and say, well, we're the vanguard, not just of the Islamic world, as they like to style themselves, but we're the vanguard of the anti-colonial movement of the global South, of the poor people of the world who are being exploited by the capitalists and the almost capitalists in Beijing, I guess you could almost argue too. So no, I mean, as long as that regime's in power, and also not to get ahead of you, but I don't think they've given up their nuclear program. I think that they're going to keep going with this nuclear program any way possible. Now, they aren't stupid enough, because the Ayatollahs are a lot of things, but stupid is not one of them.
Right.
They're not stupid enough to go buy a nuke from somebody. At least I don't think so. And I don't think they're desperate enough yet, because that would get them and whomever they bought it from in trouble. So, they want their own program. They got smart people. I think Trump sending it back was the right thing to do. But even if, that whatever, 450 kilograms or whatever, supposedly of 60% enriched uranium, was destroyed, I don't think they're going to give up on the program.
Yeah, I mean, there's work to do there, right? If we believe where the things are today, it appears that the attack was successful. And gosh, when you combine Mossad and the U.S.'s intelligence on their side, the operational brilliance, not just talking about pilots flying planes, not to diminish their role, but everything that went into this. You and I know how the military works. We're veterans. At some point, someone said, take a crew of engineers out into the Sierra, and I want you to drill an air shaft, And then they did that. Now, yeah, that's good exercise. Good job. That's good Army training, And then they're like, hey, take a take a large munition, fly out of Vegas and go north a little bit to the Sierra, see if you can hit that hole that we just pointed out in the ground.
Right.
And so not the first time that they tried this mission, right? I mean, the military always sand tables, even if it's on a grand scale. So to see that combined impact, to me, on the intel side, I'm looking at that and saying, look at the penetration that Mossad had against Hezbollah, and in the Iranian government. Every government in the world is now looking, going, how were we compromised? Which of our sites are targeted for decades by the Americans, who are practicing and building munitions specifically to take out whatever it is? A Three Gorges Dam? Oh, please. The second they built that thing, we started working on how to tear it apart from far away without hurting anybody on our side.
Right. Yeah. Thank God. Because although I do, as you know, I don't hold to the opinion that the Iranians want a nuke or nukes to use them, because again, I think they're too smart for that. They've got too much to lose. The Ayatollahs, that is, and they aren't. They know what would happen if they were to use a nuke. They would cease to exist a few minutes later. So they aren't dumb. I think they want nukes for regime insurance, but that's bad enough, because what's that done now that we see? What's now that North Korea has nukes? No one's going to touch North Korea because they don't want Tokyo or Seoul to go up in a mushroom cloud. So and as I've said before, to you and to others, if I were Israeli, I'm not sure I'd totally rely on what I'm saying, because there are some Ayatollahs, there are some elements in the Iranian government that would like to, quote unquote, hotwire the apocalypse by nuking the Israelis, or New York City if they could pull it off, which they can't. They are a distinct minority. Well, again, as I talked with your friend Dr. Howe last week about, I take issue with the people that are convinced that that's what Iran wants to do, and this sort of what's called sparking the apocalypse, hotwiring the apocalypse thing. That's not a mainstream belief in Twelver Shiism. It's a minority belief, and it's a very extremist belief even within that branch of Islam. But that said, bad enough if they get nukes, because then they would be able to act with even more impunity in terms of supporting Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and whoever else they want to support to kill Israelis or Americans. So all in all, the world's a better place without them having it. And really, I mean, the fatal flaw of I always forget, it's always called the Iran deal, but it's the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, right?
Yes.
Which Obama came up with, and which the Biden administration resurrected after Trump deep six at the first term. That thing was just predicated on a totally erroneous belief, which is, again, that we can trust the Iranians, as I was saying to you, and you asked me about just a few minutes ago. You can't trust the Ayatollahs, because they are dedicated. Their ideological underpinnings are anti-Western in general, anti-American, and anti-Israel in particular. And plus, there happens to be this doctrine in Islam that says you can lie to non-believers, that is, as they define it, non-Muslims, with impunity, and they take that sort of thing seriously. So, I don't quite understand why it was that the Democrats across administrations have become just obsessed with this idea that we can buddy up to Iran and that will make things better, at the cost of, as I think you alluded to a little bit earlier, at the cost of alienating our real true friends in the Arab world, like the Saudis and to some degree the Turks. So they're still going to try and get nukes. Trump did the right thing by, even if it wasn't totally destroyed, it's been set back for years. And that sort of gets it off the table. And, now hopefully the president can deal with more pressing issues for us, like, $36 trillion in debt.
Well, yeah. You want to talk about a bomb? How about that? Because that's going to cause a lot of problems and cause probably a lot more misery if we don't deal with it. Let's back up, though. I'm not a particular fan of what would happen if you switched roles with these people. But if there was a Catholic caliphate, or a Catholic theocracy, and I mean like a large country, right? Like Iran,
Christendom, as they used to say in the Middle Ages.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So if they had a Christendom, right, and it was, say, Turkey was a Christendom, would we treat the Pope differently if he was still in Turkey running things? Do you
Well,
think? It's
remember,
kind of an unfair
well,
example, but
well,
it is there is a comparison.
well, remember the Pope never was in Turkey. You're thinking about the ecumenical patriarch of the Orthodox Church.
Fair enough.
Um, are you saying if there were a
There was a rogue state by our definition,
rogue state?
and
Okay.
it was Christian or Catholic, right?
Uh-huh.
And specifically, or whatever. If there was, heaven forbid, a Mormon state that was, Rick, we are going to enrich, uranium.
Or a Southern
And
Baptist state,
yeah. The damn evangelicals, by the way, evangelical means everybody, but that's all right. They're all evangelicals. Yeah. I mean, how would we treat a Christian based theocracy? Like, what would we do differently? Would we?
Well, I mean, if it were something like, if it were something like the crusading states, it might be a problem. But the, the issue, the difference here is that forcible and violent conquest of non-Christians is a violation of what the Christian church and what the Bible teaches. It's a violation. Right. Yes, has it happened? Of course. But when Pope Urban gave the speech in Clermont in 1095, calling for the First Crusade in order to go help the Byzantines, who had sent a letter, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius had sent a letter saying, we could use some help here because the Seljuk Turks are finishing off what's left of our empire, which had survived, after the fall of Western Rome. We could use some help here. And, they didn't like the Western Christians much because they were under the Pope and not under the patriarch, the Orthodox patriarch. And they were a bunch of crude barbarians who didn't know how to use a fork, but they were very well known for their fighting ability, particularly the Norman French. So the Eastern Roman Emperor knew about this, and he said, "How about some help?"
Mm-hmm.
And so when the Pope gives this speech in Clermont, and he comes up, the key idea was total remission of your sins for going on crusade. Hey, I've read the Bible a number of times, Pete. It ain't in there. The Pope came up with that one on his own. I mean, it was a brilliant political maneuver because then you get all these second and third and fourth sons, knights and nobles who go off on crusade to the tune of some 60,000 of them, who are being told, well, your sins are covered if you go die on crusade. So a lot of people get this backward. They think that the crusade sparked jihad, and really actually it was much the other way around. Islamic jihad long predated Christian crusade. But that said, I mean, we had the crusades for a couple of hundred years. The Crusader states were ultimately done away with, although they were initially successful. They probably did as much damage, particularly the Fourth Crusade, which sacked Constantinople, probably did as much damage to the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which of course was Christian, as they did to the Muslims. So they were sort of a scattershot weapon. They did fight Muslims, but they also sometimes fought other Christians. But since then, although what people do since then, I'm getting ahead of myself. Since then, crusade has basically fallen out of favor. I mean, when George Bush mentioned the word crusade after 9/11, he was pilloried almost as much as bin Laden was for actually engaging in jihad. He actually said that. He said something about going on crusade against the people that had done this. And oh my God, you would have thought George Bush had drowned a puppy or something. So crusade is not something that is popular in the Christian world. It's not textual. It's not biblical. On the other hand, jihad is. References to jihad and fighting jihad are rife in the Quran and the hadiths, sayings of Muhammad. Islamic history, although large state jihads have stopped with the fall since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. One could argue, though, only because no Muslim states are really powerful enough to wage jihad. The Ottomans, actually, if you don't know, you probably know this, maybe some of your people watching don't. The Ottomans when World War I started, the Ottoman Empire still existed. And the Sultan had the Shaykh al-Islam, the chief Islamic authority in the Ottoman Empire, who was by default sort of the chief Sunni jurist in the whole world, because the Ottoman Empire was the foremost Sunni state, issued a fatwa against, because the Ottomans were on the side of the Central Powers, issued a fatwa against the English and the French and the Russians, that it was legitimate to wage jihad against them. So it hasn't happened since then in terms of states. I mean, the Saudis haven't issued any jihad fatwas of jihad, or the Turks or anybody. Well, the Turks are secular now officially, but you get them. I mean, bin Laden did his famous declaration of war against the Jews and the Crusaders from 1998, which came out a few years before 2001, was basically a declaration of jihad. So, although he had no authority to issue a fatwa, he did anyway. So you get it by the non-state groups, a lot of so-called terrorist groups, and I say so-called because they are terrorist groups, but they don't consider themselves terrorist groups. They consider themselves jihadist groups. So anyway, it's a long-winded way of saying, even these people talking about Christian nationalism. Well, Christian nationalism, I never quite really see that defined. The people say they don't like it, but I don't really know what that means. Do they mean they don't want Christian governments? Well, that's not Christian nationalism. Anyway, the point is that you ask, what will we do about a theocratic Christian state? Well, I don't think it would cause the same sort of problems that a theocratic Muslim state does, because, again, crusade has gone by the waysides and has never been commonly accepted in Christianity, except for a brief period in history, whereas jihad is still a going concern. You can get opinions today even from the Sheikh of Al-Azhar in Cairo, which is considered to be sort of the titular chief Sunni authority these days, where they talk about, jihad's legitimate. Now, you have to only fight defensive jihad. But the Iranians have a different take on it. So a Christian theocratic state, I would argue, would not present the same sort of problems in foreign policy as a Muslim jihadist state does.
There are many sects in Christianity. I guess the way I want to back up and start this by just throwing this premise together. In terms of years, just years, Islam is, I don't know what, they're 600-ish years behind us, right?
Yeah.
600-ish years ago, we had to go through a lot of fighting and figuring as we got yanked into modern times, right? And modern times had just started to become available to us with another big movement. I mean, if you want to tie the Renaissance and all this stuff together, are we just waiting on Islam to catch up to this world? Has it caught up? Are we talking about 15 dudes who are angry? What do you think? And you know me, I'm a 13er. I'm all about Musa al-Sadr, and I'm waiting for him to come back. Wrap all that together into help us understand like the timing of these things.
Right. Yeah. The argument there is that the Western civilization, which is predominantly Christian, Catholic, and then Protestant, went through. Well, first of all, the Catholic Church the Reformation occurred, which split the church into the Catholic and Protestant branches. But before that, starting a little bit before that, but in some ways kind of running parallel with it, was the Renaissance. And then you get the Renaissance, which there's actually two sort of strains of the Renaissance. One leads into the Reformation. People like Erasmus said, well, we need to go back. The church is using the Latin translation of the Bible. We need to go back and read the original Greek texts and see how that's different. And that's, for instance, one thing Luther did. And Luther said, hey, wait a minute. Some of the stuff the Catholic Church is telling me, it's not there in the Greek. So I mean, there are plenty of criticisms of Luther in the same manner to be levied later. But anyway, that's where that comes. But another strain of the Renaissance, in terms of this return to original sources, was go back and look at Greek philosophers, apart from questions of religion, like Aristotle in particular. And so that then fed into another strain that became the Renaissance. The Renaissance then led into what? That Renaissance then led into the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment, basically the Reformation said, there's more than one brand of Christianity that has the answers. So you don't have to be Catholic, you can be Protestant. The Orthodox Church, a whole different thing. They didn't go through this. The Enlightenment then says, wait a minute, maybe we don't need the church at all to answer the questions, the important questions of life. And that really, I mean, there's more to the Enlightenment than that, but that really is sort of the gist of it. The Enlightenment then leads into what, or runs parallel with, contributes to what? The scientific revolution.
Yeah.
So out of the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, you get a couple of major ideas that have come ever since the defined Western civilization, which is that really, the two really big ones are that that secularism is the answer. We should have secular governments.
Right.
You know, and what was the first secular government set up in the world? This one right here. You know, with the Constitution of the United States, was the first officially secular government.
Right.
And then the other part of that is that basically, most of our questions or most of our issues can be dealt with science and technology. Man's science and technology can solve our problems. You know, these issues of what happens to you after you die and all that sort of stuff, that's over in the religious sector. We're going to separate this out. How do we make this world a better place? You know,
Right.
science, technology, and secularism. So the Islamic world has never gone through that. The Islamic world, of course, I mean, you can go to Saudi Arabia, you can go to Turkey, and they've got computers and airplanes, and they've got high rises, and they've got high technology, but they got it from the West. I mean, they borrowed it from the West, either through colonialism where it was imposed on them, or they just bought it. They have never, Islam as a religion and ideology has never gone through this, and I think that's what you're getting at, has never gone through this Reformation and Renaissance. They have borrowed some of the concepts from Western civilization, and thus ultimately from Christianity, but they have never gone through their own intrinsic sort of navel gazing and argument and debate about do we need to update. Now, I think we're starting to see signs of it.
Agreed.
Yeah, because for instance, like a lot of people don't know this, but Turkey is working. Some years ago, the government of Turkey started on this plan where they've got their religious scholars going through the hadiths. Now, the hadiths are the secondary authority in Islam. The main authority, of course, is the Quran, which is deemed to be literally the word of Allah. The hadiths are sayings attributed to Muhammad. There's multi-volume collections of these things. And even Muslims will tell you that they don't know which ones are legitimate and which ones are not. And so what the Diyanet, which is the Turkish religious establishment that has basically took over from the old Ottoman Sheikh al-Islam, has got scholars going through these things, and they're going to like cull them out and get rid of the ones that they think are stupid and not legitimate. Like there's hadiths dealing with a whole lot of stuff. And again, they aren't quite as authoritative as the Quran, but they're awfully close. Yeah. And a lot of them are just, I'm sorry, flat out weird. Like there's some hadiths that say that the Prophet Muhammad recommended drinking camel urine. And so, you know, a lot of Muslims are like, I'm not sure I'm buying that one. And even the Islamic world, there's a ranking of them. There's a ranking of, what is it? Sahih, Hasan, and Da'if. Good, okay, and weak. And so basically what they're doing is the Diyanet, the Turkish religious authorities, are going through this. And as near as I can tell, they're being kind of hush-hush about this. They're going to get rid of the weak ones. So now the question then becomes, can you apply that? The rubber will come when you start saying, well, maybe we should apply this to the Quran, because the default position for both Sunni and Shia Muslims, and not all, but most of the sects, you're right, there's some sects, you alluded to this, there's some sects of Islam, as you know, that I've written about that have a little different take. But for the vast majority of Muslims, Sunni and Shia, the only acceptable way to read the Quran is literally. You have to read it literally. You can't say it's allegorical or it's symbolic or it's, you know,
right,
like you can with Christianity. I mean, even going back to the medieval Catholic Church, medieval Catholic Church said there are ways of reading the Bible that aren't literal. And that, you know, of course, then that became modern. Some of the modern biblical scholars have gone off the deep end. But the point is that except for Christian fundamentalists, you don't have to read the Bible 100% literally. I mean, it doesn't always make sense. I mean, look, I was talking about this the other day with some folks. I mean, look, the parables of Jesus are not literal. When Jesus is telling parables, he's telling a story. You know, was there literally a good Samaritan that helped the guy, you know, that was beat on the side of the road? Well, probably not. But Jesus' story is still pretty important. Or in Luke, when it says the birth narrative, where it says, you know, what Christmas, we always hear read at Christmas, and Caesar Augustus decreed that all the world should be taxed, or a census should be taken, right? And this is why Mary and Joseph had to go to their hometown, according to the account. Well, you know, Augustus ruled the entire Mediterranean world, that he didn't rule China. He didn't rule Central America. So, I mean, if you took that 100% literally, it wouldn't make any sense. So, but in Islam, the only acceptable exegetical paradigm, if I can use a couple of big words, has been you have to read the Quran literally. And the only people that have said you can't do that are some of the sects, like some of the Sufi groups.
Sure.
Believe it or not, actually in 12 Shiism, there's sort of a strain of this, ironically, among the Iranian and Iraqi Muslims, that where you can actually sometimes view things less than 100% literally. And again, why is that important? Because, sad to say, but the truth is that there's an awful lot of violent verses in the Quran that say you engage in violence against non-Muslims, and that article I wrote years ago that I'm still most known for, unfortunately, the beheading in the name of Islam. I analyzed the beheading verses in the Quran, and I looked at what some Muslim scholars had to say about it and that sort of thing. And literally, this is where groups like the jihadists and the terrorists have the upper hand, because they'll say, well, those verses literally say, strike off the head of the unbelievers and those who oppose you. And so if you don't do that, you're not a good Muslim.
Right.
And there are some Sufi groups and some other interpreters that would say things like, well, that doesn't literally mean chop somebody's head off. It means like rhetorically decapitate them and you're debating with them or something. But that's a distinctly minority view. When that view can be expanded and become a mainstream view in Islam, then things will be better off, because then so many people won't be able to have recourse to violence and say, oh, well, we're just doing what the Quran says. But that's the way it is right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a great answer, man. I really appreciate that. And so back in the olden times, my dad was studying to get his master's in theology. He learned a little Greek, he learned a little Hebrew. Dem's the rules if you want to get a divinity degree in many faiths. And the folks would walk up trying to proselytize, and they would say, the Bible says. And my dad would show off his Greek and Hebrew, right, and go in there and do the Erasmus thing. Mm-hmm. By the way, we forget who Erasmus is. And we also forget that Thomas More's Utopia was a piece of satire, everybody. Yes. Satire. Right?
Yes. Right.
Look up what it doesn't matter. They're not going to look it up anyhow. The purveyor of nonsense tells the story, right? That's your first clue. Anyhow, let's get out of the smart guy stuff. In the Bible, there's all kinds of things, right? Like if I want to read the Bible and I want to pull out one verse, I can justify sleeping with my daughter. That's in there. But we don't, we don't cotton that kind of behavior for obvious reasons.
Right.
And you'll hear someone say, oh, but you can't translate the Quran or whatever it is. And it's always written verbatim, but there's words in Afghanistan that are Islamic words that don't sound the same as they sound in Iraq or sound the same in the Queen's Arabic, right? Like there's all kinds of dialects where things are said, like Ramadan. The word Ramadan, you would think that'd be the same everywhere. It's not. It's not like Kodak. It's like, Ramazan and all kinds of different ways.
Ramazan in Turkey, yeah.
Right. And so it's not all the same, right? And so we have there in the Christian faith, there's fundamentalists and there's all these different people. Same thing in Judaism. Mm-hmm. When we are trying to sort this out, how much does this matter? And let me just say this too: if you're running anything, right, you have like I think a great example of this is Puerto Rico. You have your status quoers, the fuck Americas, or let's be part of that group, right? And you have to speak to these groups differently. And the same thing applies in religion. So if you have folks that are fundamentalists at heart, maybe even by DNA, probably, right, is how we get wired. Not that, and the religions we're just fundamental people, black and white people. You have to speak differently to these folks. And that en masse movement that we had in Christianity to kind of calm things down a little bit, maybe that's coming. And I guarantee you, if we were alive back then, as that thing was dawning or in the early morning hours of that movement, it would have been uncomfortable. People would be getting their heads cut off. It would be dangerous to run around. I mean, how many different heretics? We don't even know the names of them, because as they became heretical, disappeared.
Well, what was, not long after Luther and Calvin, what happened? You had the 30 Years' War, which wasn't entirely religious, but it was in large measure religious, Catholics versus Protestants. But the funny thing was, not funny, kind of sad, but it is, I guess, funny in a sense. If you go back and look at the machinations and the phases of the 30 Years' War, it had like four major phases, and really killed actually a couple of million people, which is a large percentage of the population of Europe in that time, 16, 18, 16.
And that's up close and personal killing too.
It was. And it was, but it wasn't always Catholic versus Protestant. I mean, sometimes Catholic France would come in and support Protestants. Why? because that helped them against Charles V of Spain, and
there's always politics and country.
So it's not always just religious, but anyway, but it was the fact that there was a lot of bloodshed and violence when Christianity in the West split. I mean, Islam is already split into Sunni and Shia, so that major split has already happened. But and again, it's not 1618, it's not 1600. So maybe the ferment and the changes in Islam can simply be intellectual, social, cultural, and not political and military and on the ground like that was.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because we are in a modern time and we are more connected, whether we want to be or not. Not as limited as they were in the 1500s, 1600s. These heretics, that start movements, they're all over the place. And gosh, it's really interesting to think about John Calvin saying, "I will not be summoned," and and this really is a great thing, is a great parallel. It's super smart for Dave Chappelle for saying it. He said he wouldn't be summoned by the trans community. I will not be summoned. And I'm like, oh, look at this motherfucker, pulling out. Because look, for him, that's on purpose. That's a smart dude.
Yeah.
And he's right. He won't be, to stand in front of you and to
what we need. But what you need, Pete, is somebody in the Islamic world to stand up, because it always cracks me up when you see this goofy stuff in the West by these people that act like President Trump's going to somehow deport all gay people. I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, several of his major people in his administration are gay, starting with the Treasury Secretary, who's a brilliant guy,
a fantastic job. Yeah.
I'm like, might be the most competent guy in the administration. Although big fan of Marco Rubio, but in Islam, there are still, it's still on the books because it's in the Quran and the Hadiths that gay people, homosexuals, should be killed. And there are 7 countries in the world that have the death penalty for being gay, and none of them is Texas. Okay. So, they're all Muslim countries. So, at some point, maybe somebody in the Islamic world will step up and say, hey, enough of this. You can still, Christianity can say it's a sin, but Christianity nowhere says to kill gay people. It says it's a sin you should repent from, but that's a whole different, and activists in the West try to act like that's the same as saying that we're going to kill them and throw them off a building. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not remotely the same. Yeah. So when somebody stands up, that's going to take a while, maybe. But I'm saying when we see something like that happening, or when we see then we'll know that true reform is underway, that people starting to question the narrative that's held for 1,400 years. Or like, for instance, where are Muslims killing a lot of Christians? Nigeria, in Africa. Just the other day, Nigeria, another 50 people were killed.
That's if they still exist in that country. In a lot of places, there's no more Christians or Jews to kill.
Yeah. Well, in some places that's true, but Nigeria, remember Nigeria, which is the most populous country in Africa, 200 million people, is basically, you could draw a line right through the middle of Nigeria. And north of there, it's predominantly Muslim, and south of there, it's predominantly Christian. And it's where these areas, like on the borders, or as Huntington talked about, the bloody borders of Islam in his book years ago. So there are bloody borders of Islam. And when somebody can stand up and say, hey, stop killing Christians, or God forbid, stop killing Jews, maybe then we'll see that that the Islamic world is moving toward reform. So far, you can say that in New York, or you can say that maybe in London or San Francisco. You can't say it in Mecca. You can't say it I don't think you can even say in Istanbul. So when that starts changing, then we'll know things are changing. Again, things are changing on the margins, besides, like, for instance, when I said about the Turks with their Diyanet. Look, Mohammed bin Salman is doing some amazing stuff in Saudi Arabia, right? Although his father's still alive, he's basically running the country. And they have greatly loosened up on, they allow tourism now. In fact, I can figure out a way to go over there. And women are allowed to do things that they were never allowed to do until like the last 10 or 15 years.
Right.
So things are moving in the right direction. So
yeah, no, for sure. I agree with you. Right. And part of the illustration of this is just to kind of we're away at some of the stuff we just simply don't even know. Like, if your country allows the stoning to death of people legally as part of a punishment, raise your hand. There's not a Western person that has their hand up.
Right.
It's only Islamic countries,
Right.
and it's not even hadith. That's a fatwa. Stop doing that.
Right.
Join the modern times. When the leader of a country says, we gave America a smack in the face, we don't take that guy seriously. So seriously, he's not even threatened by that, because he's not a serious worldwide player. Now, they matter because they want to make a nuclear bomb potentially, and they openly say they want to kill all the Jews and kill all the Americans. But it's also like they're not really part of the real conversation. And I don't know what we do about that. And on our left side of the political equation, we tend to give them too much rope, and so they'll start to snatch up boat crews and just incur into other places, right? And that's to the benefit of the Iraqis. The Iraqis don't want that shit either, right?
Right.
And on the right, we tend to be very dismissive of and don't bother to learn about what Islam is and how we might partner. We're just bad at that on the right? And like both sides have their problems, and they tend to go too far to their side.
Yeah.
Is there
along those? Let me say real quick, Pete. Along those lines, I think we should have relations. We should have diplomatic relations with Iran.
Of course, yeah,
of course. We had diplomatic relations with Stalin during World War II. Good thing we did, because he was the lesser evil that was in the world. We killed 1 million Vietnamese, and they killed 50,000 of us, and we had relations with them. So I think it's absurd we don't have relations with them. Now, like I said earlier, you can't trust them as far as you can throw them, but we should have diplomatic relations with them. But I think, Trump, when he came into office, says, I'm willing to talk. Supposedly he sent him a letter. He said, I'm willing to talk to the Ayatollahs.
Yeah.
But so they're the ones that can't bridge that gap, because, again, ideologically, they can't. Real quick, Khamenei's 86 years old. He's going to shuffle off the mortal coil before long. Be interesting to see who gets the next job. I think remember Raisi that died in the helicopter crash last year? Mm-hmm. So, I wonder how that helicopter crash happened.
I don't know.
No idea.
Just I was saying the other day, I was saying, we were talking about like whenever like Nord Stream gets blown up or a dam in Ukraine gets blown up. I'm like, look, until further notice, just always assume that that's us. Because we have the capability to do these things and get away with it, So it's not just flying into mountains to blow up nuclear things. And I'm not saying that we're always the guy doing this stuff, but
sometimes it's the Israelis.
a lot of capability there. I'm
sorry,
I cut you off, but
yeah. So, but
how about that bomb in Beirut that went off accidentally? That looks like less of an accident today.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. If you get really cynical, go back and watch 3 Days of the Condor, which I watched again last week.
Yeah. I do need to watch that again. Yeah.
Oh, what a great movie. It's so like 1975. It's like, God, I was 15 then. Was the world really that grimy back then? Because it's so grimy. On the other hand, that was New York City. But that movie, although all updated, but man, that's such a cynical movie. It's a great movie.
Yeah. I've derailed us all the way over to 3 Days of the Condor. Next thing you know, we'll be talking about Butch and Sundance. We got to.
Yeah. Well, since we brought it up, my favorite Redford movie is Jeremiah Johnson. Jeremiah Johnson, love that movie.
That's great.
You know what? There's a great foreign policy message in that movie too. Okay, Jeremiah Johnson, right? Mountain man, goes out and lives out west somewhere, so see the 1840s or 1850s or whatever, and he marries an Indian woman, and he has he winds up adopting a boy from a crazy woman whose family was all killed by Indians, because their settlers are encroaching on Indian territory, and some of the Indians don't take it too well. Right. But at one point, I'll try to make this quick. At one point, remember a U.S. Army train shows up. There's a lieutenant. They got a pastor. They're like, well, there's some up over these other mountains on the other side of where you live, Johnson. There's this wagon train. These settlers, they got stuck. They're going to starve to death. And we need you to help us go get them. And he reluctantly does. And to get there in time, they go through this, was it Blackfoot or Crow burial ground, the sacred, I forget which tribe. I get the tribes confused. Anyway, they're going through the burial ground. And Johnson stops them before they go through. And he says, we can't go through here. He goes, this is sacred land,
Yeah.
they will take it, they will take issue. And the minister goes, you can't really believe that, Johnson. He goes, doesn't matter if I believe it.
Doesn't
They
matter.
believe
Yeah.
it.
Right. Yeah.
They believe it. And then he
There's a
winds
great
up
example.
taking through there, and then
Yeah.
in revenge, the Indians go kill his wife and his son, and then the rest of the movie is him killing Indians. It's like this cycle of revenge. But the point of that is, this is what I always tell people. Well, I'll say, well, this is what the Quran says, or this is what Muslims teach. Literally, I'm like, you can't really believe that. It doesn't matter if I believe
Doesn't
it.
matter. Yeah. Yeah. Here's a
That's
great
not the
one for that.
point.
This is it's a real thing too. In Iraq, there's a place called Tuwaitha, everybody, and it was a nuclear facility in Iraq, and it got blown up by the Israelis. And if you go there to that neighborhood and you ask the Iraqis, Iran did that.
Yeah.
And there's no convincing them otherwise.
Yeah.
And so when you understand these things, as we try to navigate this, there's some great accounts on X you guys should follow. Adam Gamal is great. I've got his book here somewhere. Adam moved from Egypt as a kid.
Mhm.
Standard, great immigrant story. He came with nothing, no business getting on a plane and coming here, but he did it, joined the military and worked like right at the Delta Force level, right? He doesn't talk about the unit that he was with, but that's what these guys did. And so he used his skills and language and everything else to rise up and have a whole career, right? So he knows a lot about the radicalization of young people and how much that grew during the 90s. That's when he came up. There's another guy. He was on the other side. He worked in Al Qaeda, right? He was recruited. He was a young kid. He got fully indoctrinated. And then partly because he got really sick, like he'll need care for the rest of his life. I think it's for his kidneys or his liver or something like that, that he got out and ended up in the Western world enough that his name is Ayman Dean. You guys should follow Ayman Dean. And he's very critical. And he knows how all of this works and has written a great book about his time doing all of the intel operations, but very informative in terms of when we talk about these state people, there's also these actors, these operators that go out. When we went to Bosnia, I was never thinking about Islam. Okay, look, there's Bosniaks who are Islamic, right? We ate medium rare pork with them dudes all the time, right? And they ripping back their Slivovitz that they made. And so there were a lot of Jack Muslims there, but that changed when Al Qaeda got out there and started operating in that area, and they started flipping people to the hard side. So as soon as you think you have your hands wrapped around this, go check out accounts like those guys' accounts when they talk about these things, and you'll get an idea. Listen to Tim's stuff. Go to Tim's website. Look, Tim's website right here. Ding, 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 down below. Get his books and just listen to what he's talking about, because this isn't easy stuff to master. He's talking 500, 600, 800 years back in history. There's a great book about Arab history.
And Pete, I don't purport to be a master of this either. I mean, it's too large and too complex.
It's too big, right? Yeah.
I know a lot about certain things, and other things I'm a neophyte. I mean, there's just too much. There's too much to learn. You have to live 17 lifetimes to be able to master it all. So,
yeah. There's a great book called "It's a 3,000 Years." It's by a guy named Timothy McIntosh Smith. 3,000 Year History of the Arabs. And it's awesome. I'll put the link up for that in there. Not to step on Tim's. You guys definitely go support Tim's stuff, but just to give you an idea, that book it's like a legal dictionary. It's that thick, and it's when you read that, you have to have a command, and it's like you need a concordance for this book to master all the references. Then you can go back and read all the other books. So this is like a full encyclopedia available to you on the Arabs. And Arabs and Islam are separate things. They overlap, but just to talk about the complexity of these things. I want to ask you this. One of the things that bothers me is when I see pictures on X and like, oh, the Iranians are flying their flags again. There's that red flag. Look out.
The red flag of Jam Quran. Yes.
Yeah. And we get so enraptured by these things. It's a fucking flag. And what are they going to do? Not a goddamn thing. And that's the truth.
Pete, I'm telling you, a lot of it, I don't remember if I sent you my article last Friday or not, but basically I took dispensationalist Christians to task on this because, I'm sure you saw it because Hal and I talked about it. Yeah. And by the way, let me mention, I'm glad you have my website up, but also I've written 160. Hang on, I got it over here. I've written 162 articles over at the stream,
Right. I'll put that up.
Yeah. And probably of the 160 articles, probably I'd say half of them are on Islam. All right. On other stuff too, UFOs and Indiana Jones but a lot of them are
Tolkien.
And Shakespeare and Tolkien. Yeah. So,
Okay, so there's that book on the 3,000 history of the
oh yeah,
Arabs.
yeah. I've
Timothy
seen that. I've
McIntosh
not
Smith.
actually read that book. I've seen it.
Oh man, it's a monster. And as soon as you read it, you're like, I got to read 5 more books just to understand what I'm trying to understand. Okay, I'll shut up. And I'm going to put up your stream link now too.
Yeah. Thank you. What I was going to say was the reason you see stuff like you just said on Twitter a moment ago is because so many Americans, both in the political class and not, are obsessed with eschatology, because a lot of Christians, particularly conservative fundamentalist Christians, think we're in the last times. And they see sort of like, I don't know, it's sort of like looking in a mirror. You look at the Iranians, and a lot of the Iranians, Twelver Shiism in particular, they're Sunnis that are of this persuasion too. I think I sent you the link on Twitter, where I just saw an article the other day by a Pakistani speculating about whether the signs in Islam, there's signs in Islam.
Right, I saw that. Yeah,
the major and minor signs about the coming of the Mahdi and the return of Jesus and all that stuff, if those are being fulfilled right now. So it's. I mean, golly, I remember I first wrote about this back when I did my doctoral dissertation. Lord Almighty, 2001. Where I actually was amazed to find out, because I wrote my dissertation on Sunni eschatology, Sunni beliefs about the end of time, and I was amazed to find out that a lot of Sunni Muslim Arab writers were influenced by people like Hal Lindsey, that 1971 book, The Late Great Planet Earth, which is like the best-selling book of Christian eschatology of all time, or Pat Robertson, or people like that. They were reading those people and then sort of injecting those viewpoints, basically the idea of what we call newspaper exegesis. You can go like look at current events and try to shoehorn them into what your Bible or the Quran teaches. They were taking those people and like incorporating them into their Islamic beliefs to try to figure out when the Mahdi is going to come. So, but then, we saw this in the last couple of weeks with this whole build up to, and then the aftermath of bombing Iran. I mean, I'm sure you saw some of the Tucker and Ted Cruz interview, right?
Did. Yep.
And Tucker kind of took him to task. And I thought it was not unfair at all, where he's like, basically, what's the population of Iran? And Ted Cruz had no idea. I'm like, well, you want to attack the country? Maybe you should know something about it. And then Ted Cruz says the same thing that Mike Johnson said last year, which is basically like, well, it's biblical to support Israel. I'm like, well, and then if you're not a Christian, you think, well, that's what all Christians believe. And I pointed out in my article, not all Christians believe that, because not all Christians are evangelicals. Not all Christians believe that the modern state of Israel is the same as the Israel of 3,000 years ago. So my point is, and then I end the article saying, yes, I think we should support Israel. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but let's not support Israel based on our interpretation of Genesis, okay, upon which Christians don't even agree. Let's support Israel because Israel's a democracy and doesn't throw gay people off of buildings and opposes Islamic fundamentalism. That's why we should support Israel.
And they don't commit genocide.
They don't commit genocide.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to say, I even said in the article, though, I'm not really comfortable with what they're doing, some of the stuff they're doing in Gaza, however, I mean, but not every Palestinian supports Hamas. I mean, they don't have a say in it. So,
but it's not a legal genocide. Like, there's legal parameters for that, and we can't lose sight of what Hamas has done. You're right. And this is the thing. And so, look, yes, people are dying, but would they be dying if Hamas didn't run Israel, or didn't run Palestine? Right. And the answer is probably not.
Right. Remember, they don't run the West Bank. Remember,
they don't run the West Bank.
The Palestinian Authority. And so they are opposed to Hamas. So Hamas runs that hellhole known as Gaza, basically.
Yeah. And they're the ones that destroyed it. They're the ones that killed everybody in that place, and by design. That was part of it.
At the end of his first term, Trump put out a very big plan for economically developing that. And I mean, I wrote a big article on it at the stream. It was a very good plan. Of course, Trump, real estate, hey, why can't we all make money and can't we all just get along? Which, works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for ideologues. It's the problem. But it was a brilliant plan. It was like, here's how to build infrastructure in Gaza and the West Bank. And, we can 5G and tourism and all this stuff. And you guys can be, big, beautiful plan. You could be
Did you
rich.
read Bibi's book before all this happened
Who's,
several years ago? Bibi
who's,
Netanyahu's
no.
Netanyahu's book. Oh, he kind of did the same thing. He's like, look at what they've done. Look at what we've done. We're like a world center for integration and innovation.
And
And
with
all
no
this.
natural resources. I mean, Israel basically has no natural resources.
Just worked hard, right? Yeah, and so you can see that and you can say that, but both of those do. And this is the thing that's always interesting to me. And again, Trump's not my cup of tea. I'll say that over and over again. People can believe that or not, but both of those dudes have a problem when the politics overtakes whatever's real. And so I don't know, like when politics stop with Netanyahu and the lawfare against him, and when he's actually maybe stolen something, because it's impossible to know because he makes and his opponents are crazy about his presence, and yet he's been the prime minister for almost 30 years. Most of the last 30 years, right? And so I don't know, like when things are even possible for those dudes, even if they have great intent, because there's so much baggage that comes
and
with
they've made up so much crap about Trump that turned out not to be true.
Oh yeah,
now it's not like you don't want to believe anything they say.
Yeah, or when he's like, they're spying on my campaign, and we laugh at him. You're like, oh, they actually did that, and like you don't.
Russia
you don't have
collusion. Russia collusion. That was totally fabricated by starting with the Hillary Clinton campaign to make excuses for themselves.
I want to get us back to Iran.
Yeah.
So when we look at Iran and we try to think of what's next, will they loosen their grip on their proxies? Do you think?
Short term, yeah, because they have no choice. Right. Medium to long term, no, because that's going to be how they're going to strike back at Israel.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This is the. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, short term, I think they have no choice because they're going to have to regroup and recoup their losses at home. But ultimately, no, because it gives them too much leverage. Again, well, really, you could almost look at this, I think, in a lot of ways, what Iran does with them, with Hamas in the West Bank, in Gaza, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and with the Houthis down in Yemen, that's not aimed, it's aimed literally at Israel. But in a lot of ways, it's also aimed at the larger Muslim world because, again, as I pointed out, other places, and you and I, I'm sure, have talked about at some point, there basically is a three-way struggle for power in the Middle East among the Muslim countries. And who are the three biggies? Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, right? Yeah. They all have slightly different takes on Islam. They all have different cultures. And that in particular, what Iran has done with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis was aimed at embarrassing first and foremost the Saudis, because they're and they'll say this in their public pronouncements and the state media. Well, look at the Arabs. The Arabs were, Palestinians are Arabs, and the other Arabs aren't even helping them. The Sunnis aren't even helping them. Here's Iran. We don't have any territorial claims there. We're Shia. We're not even Arab. And who's helping the Palestinians, the poor oppressed Palestinians? We are. So we are standing up for Islamic norms more than the rest of you. The rest of you recalcitrant and faux Muslims. So and they're not going to give that up. My point is the Iranians are not going to give that leverage up.
It's a big point that people need to understand. There's just not enough secular, anti-secular stuff to make this work, right? This really is politics when it comes down to it. When I was in Iraq, all the Iraqis would tell me, and at some point you just got to believe them, when all over, like all these different provinces I was in, like, hey, Pete, we're just not that religious, man. This you guys brought this. This is not us. Like, okay, we don't want Iran in our business. They're our neighbor and we like them kind of, but we don't want them in our business. Right. This has nothing to do with Sunni and Shia.
Right.
And so you're like, wait, what? And so you slowly have to this took a long time to put this together because we have this belief and it's deep rooted in us. But really, it has very little to do with how you wear the shirt of your collar and the Jesus that you believe in. It's more like, how do you hold control? And if Iraq can be divided and not be strong and dominated by Iran, well, they want that. And if Saudi can influence Iraq and have it be less strong so they can, they want that. And all those substates, they want that. And so they do. I mean, why else would Iran, a Shia country, if this all mattered, why would they be employing, Sunni people like to do their worst for them? They wouldn't do it, but they're in cahoots for other reasons. And we really lose track of that. And we think it's all about, look, I'm a 13er, that, but it's all about 5 or 6 or 11 or 12 or all these different groups and them rising to the top. No, that's a piece of it, but
I think the Houthis are a good example of that. I mean, and you said a few minutes ago, I lost it. I was going to say something at the time and I lost it. You said something about somebody some group was only their beliefs were being exacerbated or exploited or something like that. I forget who you were talking about, but that I think that's the Houthis. Most people don't understand. I get so sick of people talk about of the proxies that Iran employs, and that's not even really fair because Hezbollah is not just a proxy. Okay,
Right.
A large percentage. Perhaps, probably at this point, no, since there's never been a census done since 1976 in Lebanon, the majority of people in Lebanon are probably Shia now. Now, I might push back on you a little bit, Pete. I don't think that it's all political. I think that we do.
I think it's primarily political.
I think we tend to fall overboard and say it's primarily religious, and it's not.
Yeah.
I think it's equally political and religious. So you can't, and probably economic and other things too. But Hezbollah, although as a militia was armed and created by the Iranians, that doesn't change the fact that a majority of people in Lebanon are Shia Muslim. That's true. Hamas has, you could say, legitimate beefs with the Palestinians have maybe not Hamas. The Palestinians have legitimate beef with the Israelis. You could say that. Now, Hamas being armed by the Iranians is a whole different issue. But the Houthis are different. Now, the Houthis, Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia, are 12ers, exactly like Iran. The Shia in the Houthis are a branch of Shia called the Zaydis. They are 5ers, right? They're a different branch of Shiism. They are not nearly as messianic and eschatological as the Iranian or the Iraqi 12er Shia are, at least on paper. And the Houthis, they're the major tribe that is of this brand of Islam called Zaydi Islam, fiber Shiism. They have had historically really legitimate beefs with the people running the country. The country is something like, we don't know again exactly, but I've seen figures for the Zaydis, the Zaydi Shia in Yemen being anywhere between 25 and 40%. And I tend to think it's more toward the latter because the majority that are Sunni don't really want people to know how many Shia are there. And, that was for a long time. There was a Shia kingdom called the Mutawakkilite kingdom down there. And then they ruled the country for a long time. And then things changed eventually. Then we had that period where we had North and South Yemen and all that stuff. But eventually the Yemens merged in 1990, 1991 after the end of the Cold War. And the government was set up, and the government was Sunni, and the government basically treated the Zaydis, the Houthis, of whom the Houthi tribe is the majority. They didn't treat them very well, and the Houthis, who again, I'm trying not to mix up terms to confuse people too much, but the Houthis or the Zaydis in Islamic terms, they weren't getting really help from anybody, and they were being treated badly. And eventually what happened was Iran decided, although they're not the exact kind of 12 Shia that they are, that the Iranians could exploit the fact that they're Shia, and they started funding them and eventually sending them weapons. And the price of this support was what? The price of this support was, like, every so often we want you to put out as much anti-Israel and anti-American rhetoric as you can, and every so often launch some missiles toward Israel. So it's sort of an astroturfed movement in that regard, but people, I hear people refer to the Houthi rebels. Well, they actually were the majority government for a while, and just recently they actually were in control of the government. Then they were pushed aside up into the highlands again. So and also the Saudis were bombing them for a while. So it's a real mess down there. But the Houthis are not just a group of terrorists, is my point. They actually have some points in terms of being oppressed by the larger Sunni population. And they turned to Iran because nobody else would help them.
I would say this too, before all of this current violence broke out, which is not that long ago, I would make a joke about how there's war in Yemen. Nope, we don't seem to give a shit. And I was told, it's not that important to us, and it's like, you're right. But as soon as it got expensive on oil or potato chips or tobacco, whatever it is, we were ready to kill some fucking people.
Right.
Send
a carrier group in there.
Yeah, and we all of a sudden cared, and the message has changed, and so we can never lose sight of the fact that Iran has a legitimate beef with us, and if they had done to us what we had done to them and surrounded them with bases and put them in a pretty tight box, we'd be pretty upset. And so this is an interesting thing that I've sort of come to realize about Donald Trump. And again, not a fan of Donald Trump. I have to say that out loud every time because people get mad at me. But there's a lot of Kennedy in his policies, and he's like, don't the Iranians love their children? And of course they do. This is a ground truth thing that I learned. We all want better things for our kids, and if they don't have a path, then they can't. Even the mullahs, the imams, the ayatollahs, all of those leaders, the clerics of any world, they have to mind the well-being of these people, the sheikhs, the tribal elders, all these guys that they're the ones that have to solve these problems day in, day out. Doesn't give them a pass to do bad things. He shouldn't. No ayatollah should be posting like kill all the Jews and use nuclear bombs to do it. Shouldn't do that. But we can't and don't want all their problems. We can't fix them. We can't solve those things. And so we have to keep in mind that these guys are trying to do the best thing they can. And if the Houthis have no other option, then guess what? Yeah, they're going to go to their neighbors. Hey, we have all this surplus gas. It's against the law for us to sell it. But if you don't mind buying that tank, but here it comes, And we need to be part of the solution and provide real off ramps for these folks. Otherwise, this just keeps going and it doesn't do anybody any damn good.
Yeah, I mean, I think a very smart foreign policy thing to do, and Trump's just the kind of guy that maybe do it, was send someone talk to the Houthis and say, look, hey, we'll replace whatever aid you're getting from the Iranians, except for the missiles. We'll replace that if you guys will stand down and try to work here and create a viable government in your own country and stop lobbing missiles at the Saudis and at the Israelis.
Sure.
And I think, that's something that might work. I mean, look, again, whatever we say about Trump, he did get those Abraham Accords done, his administration.
I want that done. Yeah.
We had countries, that wouldn't even talk to Israel are now at peace with Israel. And supposedly they're working on a couple of more. So I think that would work with the Houthis. And again, he's the kind of guy that can think outside the box. I mean, whatever you think about it, trying to buy Greenland was thinking outside the box.
Yeah. Who knows if it's helpful or not, right? But change happens, and every president wants to get peace in the Middle East as impossible as that can. But here's a different approach that we haven't seen. I know for sure from listening to both sides and believing them, they don't want a two-state solution. They've tried that, and it's just. I mean, everybody has walked away from that solution. So today, it's just not possible. So what else can we try?
Yeah. I don't know. I really don't. But you know what, though? The thing with peace in the Middle East, basically, because from the American perspective, has always been defined as peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Yes.
There's a lot more to the Middle East than that. And I think Trump's well aware of that. And I don't know. Yeah, that thing about, I don't know how that's ever resolved, but I think the people in the West Bank are willing to try to resolve it peacefully. It's Hamas in Gaza that's not.
Right. And that whole fight would be over if Hamas would just take a knee and say, we surrender unconditionally, then violence stops instantly, and then the healing starts, but they won't. They've got fight in them, so they need to fight more. And unfortunately, that means in this case, people have to die. Anything, I guess here, I'll ask you this. If you were to get a conversation with the boss, in this case, I mean Donald Trump, and he's like, you got 10 minutes, you got one thing you could talk about. What are you going to encourage him to do within your sphere of knowledge? What do you want him to do?
One thing or several things?
Well, whatever. We can bend the rules a little bit. Several things, but don't go too long. Like you got 2 minutes with him.
That's probably too long. I probably talk too much. I would say, in terms of foreign policy in this region, I would say that you need to try to do something officially to stand up for Christians who are being persecuted in the region, because that includes Islamic Africa, the Islamic world writ large. I would tell him to talk to the Houthis, like I just said a moment ago, because I think he could get them to disengage. He could lure them away from the Iranians, which would solve, a major problem in the Middle East, not with vis-a-vis Israel and the Saudis, but with Red Sea passage. That would help solve that problem. I would tell him to go find a way to bury the hatchet with Erdogan, because we're getting along with the Saudis. He and Mohammed bin Salman get along pretty well. But I think that really, in many ways, the key country in the Middle East is Turkey. And people forget this. Turkey is the second largest army in NATO. Turkey's very important. Turkey's centrally located. It's an advanced country. And Turkey has the cachet of the Ottoman Empire, which, maybe some people don't like. In fact, I used to always yank the chain of my Arab friends in grad school. I'd say, too bad the Ottomans aren't still there to take care, keep you guys in line. I used to yank the chain.
Yeah.
Which, believe me, that really did.
Yeah.
But the Turks really, I think, are in many ways are the bridge between East and West. And I think a lot of what Erdogan does and says, going back to what you and I were talking about earlier, is political. It's not so much because of really deep religious belief, but it's political. Again, going back to that three-way struggle between the Saudis and the Iranians and the Turks. So I think that we really need to find a way to bury the hatchet with the Turks and get along with them better and kind of get them back in the fold, which I think if anybody could do, Trump might be able to do. So I don't know. That's probably the three big things I'd tell them.
Yeah. This is my last big question. So I'm told all the time that America hates immigrants and that we hate Arabs. We hate Islamic people. Is that true?
No, I think that's goofy. Most Americans, I think, first of all, I don't think anybody hates immigrants. I think people are just tired of mass illegal immigration. I mean, I think that's something that the left and the media has successfully conflated the two in the Democrat Party because they have a vested interest in doing that. And for that matter, actually, many American businesses who employ illegals, they like cheap labor, right? And they have tried to portray with
slavery is still a thing, even if it's a modern form and you get paid. It's like we can get labor for less money. Fuck yeah.
No, I know. But it's like, no, I don't know anybody that's against legal immigration. Right. But a lot of people are against illegal. And as far as Muslims, I think you don't just mean Arabs, you probably mean Muslims. Well, I think that's...
I put both into a mix. I categorize them individually.
That's demonstrably untrue because on September 10th of 2000, there were approximately 900 mosques in America. And that includes a lot of those little storefront things you see. They weren't all standalone mosques. Right. Last time I checked, there were 2,400 mosques in America. So if America was so Islamophobic or Arabophobic, how has the number of mosques in this country almost tripled? Right. Well, the answer is we're not. In fact, I think Americans have bent over the backwards to try to demonstrate since 9/11 that they don't hate Muslims. And I think that's clear.
Yeah. And we also get a minute to get used to it. That's the other thing. It's like, hey, because I struggle. Here's one of my struggles, right? And nobody can claim that people can claim I'm an Islamophobe, but I'm an expert on me. I'm going to tell you right now. I've never been diagnosed with a phobia about Islamic people. So we're in the clear. I was in San Francisco and there were two women fully burqa'd, right? Just the slits. That's all they had. And they were being squired. And we're in the financial district of San Francisco. And I had this argument with myself. And I'm like, look at that shit right there. This is like Gloria Steinem is like breathing right now, less than 2 miles from where I'm standing. And this shit is going on here in San Francisco. This is my thought. This is just me and myself. I'm not saying it out loud. And then I thought, you asshole, Pete. These people, it's a cultural, tolerant place. If they need a squire to walk around because that's what their religion says, then they get to goddamn do it. You shut your mouth. And I'm like, you know what? Fuck that. So I just I spun myself around. And that's like the duality of all these things, and so we all get time to struggle with that. As much as I'm very tolerant of all kinds of things, we have areas where we struggle. And we
I know. But you know what? That outfit in San Francisco probably helps with all the human waste. Masks you from the human waste on the sidewalk.
But down over there in the Fido,
yeah. But on the other hand, Pete, what happens is we've seen examples of this. People come here and want to dress like that. Well, then they want to wear that when they have their driver's licenses taken. I'm like, no, you can't do that. You can't wear that to have your driver's license taken because the point of a driver's license is to see your face.
Yeah, it's a legal ID.
So it's one thing to come here and say, okay, we want to be tolerated this way. It's another to come here and say, no, we want you to change your cultural mores and your laws to accommodate us. And I think that's what pisses people off, Right. I mean, I'm telling you, the next thing that's coming, Pete, is going to be polytheism. Like not polytheism, polygamy. Muslims, we've already starting to see it in some places where Muslims, because this is going on sub rosa all over the place. There are Muslim men that have more than one wife because the Quran says you can have
course.
wives.
Yeah.
And so they're going to be pushing. There's going to be a push. You watch. And the argument is going to be, of course, well, you allow gay marriage. Why don't you allow us to marry 2 women or 3 women or 4 women?
It is a religious freedom that they should be afforded, right? That's absolutely an argument.
So then, I mean, how do you deal with that? Well, tolerance says you have to let them do it, but then that means you're changing your cultural mores to accommodate a very small minority. So it's a sticky wicket, right? I mean, I tend to agree that Muslims want to come here and practice. That's fine. But, don't come here and tell me we have to change our rules and laws to fit you. Or, like you see people going to Europe and complaining about the accommodations when they're getting welfare. I'm like, oh, please. Like you're going to get better accommodations in Afghanistan or Syria? I mean, come on.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing when you think about that. I thought about polygamy a lot because I agree with you. Like there's a progression. And if I see that fence post, I'm like, aha, we've come too far, right? And I thought through this whole thing because there is a religious freedom, but not here. And so now I ask people, particularly people on the left who are a little bit different on this thing. And I'll say, what about polygamy? Like we all like polyamory because that's sexy. What about? Oh, no, that's, and this is the universal answer. No, that harms women. Okay. I'll write that down. Just like when John McCain was too old to be president. Okay. I'll write that down. Too old. You guys said it. Those are the rules, right? But these rules change.
Remember, Reagan was too old to be president.
I remember, and he was
69.
He was. Well, he was for the second term, right? The first term went better. Anyhow, so listen, I told you last question like 5 different things ago. So anything you want to say in closing before we go? Do you want to ask me any questions?
No. Well, no, probably baseball related, but I
like baseball questions. Go ahead.
So no, not really a question, but I was interested a couple weeks ago. You had that stuff up, and I got to say, Pete, I'm so old school. I understand ERA and batting average and slugging percentage. I have tried. I cannot understand wins above replacement.
Oh yeah, it's a hard stat to understand. I don't think that they understand it, frankly.
Can you explain it to me simply?
Yeah, so they try to make as accurately as they can and all-encompassing on the field measurement. So defense, offense, that kind of thing. It doesn't account for leadership. It doesn't account for it's a bad measure of durability and longevity, right? So if you're going to go out and say, I'm going to be a Hall of Fame grade second baseman for the next 18 years, do you want to hire me? Oh yes, of course. But if you're not the right kind of Hall of Fame grade player for them, you'll be rated low. Like someone like Bill Buckner is a good example. Is he a Hall of Famer? I don't know, but he's damn close. His WAR is like 15. You're like, come on. You need 60 to really be like, like a borderline guy. He's 15. He has 2,700 hits. You're telling me, oh, well, he didn't have power. But he's got almost 500 doubles. He's got more doubles than he has strikeouts. You telling me that's not valuable? And so they struggle with things like, you remember the player, Brett Butler. Fantastic player, right? A pest. He's one of the greatest center fielders of all time, but he doesn't rate as well as he might in WAR. And so that's the problem with that. Is like there's also a defensive bonus. So like if you play center field or shortstop, higher WAR automatically. If you play DH, you get a lower WAR. And so they're trying to find out. Here's the biggest problem I think with WAR. When we look at a player that's above replacement level, that player is probably above average on the bell curve anyhow, right? Because to get there, you have to be above average. Because all the below average guys, they get wiped out and they don't have long careers. So the curve is kind of tilted that way. So they're trying to find that middle line. We have a guy that's good enough to play, but not good enough to start. It's kind of that guy. And so you're trying to say how many of them better than that guy that you are, and we don't even know who that guy is. We don't know who the WAR guy is.
Oh, okay. It's like a hypothetical metric.
Right. So, it's helpful, like a lot of stats. It gives you an idea of like, oh, that guy struck out 190 times. That doesn't seem very good, and then you look deeper and like, oh, he hit 500 home runs this season. No, who cares? Like all of a sudden it doesn't matter. So it's one of those stats where it starts you off like, what does it look like? And then all of a sudden you realize you're 3 stats deep and you're like, what the fuck does it even matter? You know, I think Adrian Beltre is the best third baseman ever. Is he significantly better than Mike Schmidt? No. And if you love Mike Schmidt, you can be like, he's nowhere near. It doesn't matter. They're the same spot on the curve. They're way over here, off the curve. You can't even see. You know, there's no difference between those guys.
You had an interesting thing about a few weeks ago about Pete Rose like among guys, what was like over 30 years old. Of course, Pete played till he was, 44 or something.
Yeah, like the last 12 years of his career, because he played for like 25 years or whatever, were better than almost every career in the history of baseball.
Yeah.
And those were his worst years,
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right.
And he's incredible.
What was his WAR? I don't remember.
Oh, I don't know. I have to think about what it is.
I don't think it was that high.
It is not as high because he wasn't, he doesn't have a lot of power. That hurts him, right?
Right. I think he only hit like 120 home runs or something.
Right. I mean, he had a shitload of doubles. You can't hit more doubles than him. I mean, that's impossible, But they don't value doubles like they do home runs,
Right.
And the thing is there's guys that can't stay on the field. Now, look, should Pete have retired earlier? Maybe if he wanted to maintain his, but he didn't care about that. He wanted to break a very specific record.
Right.
And by the way, great coach. You remember how good of a manager he was?
Yeah, he was a good manager. Yeah.
His WAR is 79.6. By the way, the difference between 79.6 and 75 is nothing over 20 years.
Oh, okay.
That's one guy farts a little bit too much. That's the other thing is like people get precious about this stuff, but the difference in fielding between two players. These are good players and not Hall of Fame players. Yeah. It's like one and a half hits a month or 4 hits a month. You're not going to see that. You're just not going to see that day to day, So, yeah.
Well, did it affect him that he played like 4 different positions in terms of the defense?
Yeah. I mean, second base higher, right?
Played first second, base, third, right field.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Left and at first base, I think. I think he played 5.
So when he plays first base, it's hurting his numbers. It's it's pulling away from his offensive value because he's automatically like even the best first baseman over his whole career. I mean, think of the best first baseman you can think of. Whoever they are, they're lucky if they have a positive WAR on defense.
Right. Yeah.
Just
all because they stand there and catch the ball. For the most part.
And that's the thing. That's what they're trying to evaluate. Like people love to say, oh, but they save every play a first baseman makes. Like 98% of them are easier than anything a shortstop does.
Yeah. Right.
And so like, yes, you're standing there. Your job is to catch the ball. Well, they save errors. Do they, or do they just catch the ball? I mean, the second baseman and shortstop have to catch a throw from the catcher while they're moving with another guy moving in and then slap a tag down. That's way harder than scooping a bad throw. Way harder.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Okay.
All right. Well, let me wrap this thing up. Everybody else, that's 2 shows today. I'm going to be doing some traveling, so you may not see me as much, but you are going to see some shows that got some stuff for the rest of the week. I will see you all later. Tim, I'll say goodbye to you in a second. Thank you very much for coming on, man. That was great. I really enjoyed it.